Hello everybody, this is Maniac4Bricks, and I am here today with the LEGO Bionicle Toa Mata collection. These are the original 6 Toa hero figures that were released in 2001. As far as all the parts and the set numbers and things like that, you can find more information about that in the description below. Roughly $7 for each of these figures when you bought them back in the day, and I've actually seen them go together relatively $10 each, or maybe more, depending on if they have all the parts, or if they have the canisters with them, or if they're sealed. It varies, but it's not too hard to find these online nowadays, and to find them all together with that. But you could also find them at other auctions online, such as eBay, where they might be in, let's say, finding one figure at a time. So let's continue with the story part of these figures. The Toa Mata, or as they're originally known just Toa, were mysterious creatures that washed up on the shores of the island of Mata Nui. These biomechanical creatures fell out of the canisters that they were transported in, as you see on the side, and assembled themselves and started to wander the island. Over time, they found that each of them had elemental powers, and even their masks, in which they were contained in the canisters, were special to each one and had some unique abilities. This is just a demonstration right here of some of the promotional video that was accompanied with the Bionicle release. But I just want to take this moment to describe how these canisters are actually important if you were to collect the figures. They are unique ways of demonstrating how these figures were represented back in the time. You can see up here that it says LEGO Technic and Bionicle at the bottom. See, at the time of their release, LEGO wasn't certain if this was going to be a long-running theme, as we know now it is. It actually started out kind of like the Robo-Riders and Slizers and Throwbots of old, in which it was just a bunch of different mechanical creatures that had elemental powers, and, well, and see where LEGO would take it after that point. So it's considered a sub-theme of Technic, but not necessarily its own separate thing. It did borrow a lot of pieces from Technic, which we'll talk about later in the review. They even included a mini CD-ROM, which you could put into your computer and learn more about these characters in story, and that was actually pretty cool to get at the time. I still have mine, and I think it still works on the computer. Now, what's interesting even about the canisters by themselves is that they have this sleeve on top of them, so you can turn and check out each of the figures on their own. They have their own can code, the mask, and a part of the instructions to show how these are first shown on the island, and then part of their instructions, part of the play features, and back to the front. And it even shows on top here all the different figures in the line at the time. It even shows some more of the information about each of their sets. What's nice about these is you can also use the tops of them for some accessories and customization. They've offered in the instructions that you would take the heads off of each of the figures and place the masks on them so that you can have it all the way around displaying each of the masks. And even on here, it can attach a mask as well. Now, as far as containing these creatures, and they're actually pretty good at it. I have two examples here. One is Liwa and one is Gali. Now, as far as, storage goes, I've really appreciated how the canisters were used in Bionicle. Not even at this year, but in years afterwards, because they took a very simple round container to fit the figures in there. You'd only have to take apart a couple pieces to really fit them in, but you'll actually get some pretty nice storage out of them if you needed to store them away or keep the parts together. Now, there are some figures that you will need to take some things like the arms off if they have broad shoulders or long arms or long accessories. So it'll take a little bit of taking apart the figures, but I found it to be relatively easy if you were to reassemble them. Now let's take a look at each of the figures and their play features. To start things off, we'll take a look at 3 figures at the same time. From left to right, we have Liwa, Tahu, and Kopaka. The reason why I mentioned all three of these figures in the same segment of the video is because they have relatively the same build and the same idea for the play functions. So these pretty much have the same build from top to bottom, in that their only differences are the colors that are used for each of their color schemes. As you can easily identify them apart from each other by the colors, and the secondary colors actually work very well with them. So it's not the same color, but it's still relatively in the same vein of their character. There is some differences, as you can see on the shoulders. Two of these have the narrower shoulders just by the way the pieces are arranged, and this one has the more broad shoulder. On the middles of them, they have the same configuration as far as how the arms are displayed. You have the right arm for each of them can be moved by a gear function, which we'll take a look at in a little bit. The left arm is meant to be a stationary arm, which you can move to different poses. First of all, by the ball joint. So each of them have a ball joint on the shoulder, and even maybe a second one that's on the wrist. So you can move a hand around. You can even pose them with having the swords in hand, at least for two of them, because for Kopaka, he has a shield in his hand. And this one, yes, does have a little bit of spinning. It's not really supposed to spin, but that's just use of the Technic part that they had at the time that this was released. So you can get a little bit of different posing with it, and even has a slightly different arm here, as well as Liwa, who has the same arm there. So if you want to move this around different angles, you could just simply rearrange the shoulder piece, and you can get some various poses with it. Now, Liwa is quite interesting, because for his stationary arm, it's actually limp. It's a Technic piece, just as we saw with Kopaka, that's arranged here, so you get more swinging action with it, perhaps indicating how he swings through the vines in the trees in the jungle. Or you can use it as a way of holding on to his weapon and making it move with him. While we're at it, we might as well explain that this is the original gearbox for the Toa. It's a very simple system in which the main body is the place to hold the pieces, a specialized part at that too, and you have these gears moving back and forth to make the right arm move. The right arm is not really good for posability, even though it does have a ball joint here. You could create some different poses with it, but it will always, confined to gravity when it comes to, posing. You can't really hold this arm up all the way without it falling back down. And that's something that the newer Toa have actually done very much better in 2016 and 2015 lines, is that they add friction so that the arms can stay in place. Otherwise, you would need to customize these to make them hold up. Up next, we'll take a look at Toa Onua and Toa Gali. Gali is the only one of these six that's feminine, and it actually kind of holds through to some of the detail on her. It does add a couple extra pieces that are a little bit open, but actually works pretty nicely for just a different appearance to the other Toa. Now, these two are particularly interesting because of a few things. They have the same types of arms and tools on each arm, which play into the play feature, which is also something these two only have. And also, I'd like to mention that they have different appearances for their chest, and one of them having to be just the arrangement of the head. This one has a more hunchback look, the way that the head is arranged. Both of these have broad shoulders, and they also both have the same leg arrangement. These are the same leg pieces that were used with the other three that we saw earlier, but they're flipped upside down for a more different style. Now, all two of these figures have the same gearbox mechanism in which you turn this at the back to make the arm move. The difference here is it has two on each, so you can make both arms move kind of opposite of each other. So if not for the legs being in the way, then you could get some real digging action with Onua at whatever speed you'd like. And you can kind of hold them a little bit better in terms of posability if the arms are relatively in the same spot. You can always take these out if you want to just have one arm in the air, like so. And for Gali, it's again the same motion, but this time with her hooks, so that she can grab onto ledges. The only problem is, occasionally with these types of pieces, and it could be for any of the Toa, that the connection may not be complete there, and it can make them lose their tools. What I find interesting with Gali in this particular case, and it's a different one than my original version of Gali, is that she has more friction for all of these poses, which is actually nice, and I think it just has to do with how tight these pieces are arranged to each other, but it does work a lot better if you were to pose her with it, as long as that doesn't fall out due to gravity. Now you can also arrange these tools into different sides so that you can create some more unique looks to them. In fact, they do that sometimes with Onua. Some people will have the claws digging forward or digging backward to create a different style for him. It'll still have the same play function, but it will have a more interesting appearance. Up last of the bunch, we have Pohatu. The reason why he has his own segment for this review is because he has an entirely different body shape compared to all the other Toa. Now don't get me wrong, it still uses some of the same pieces, but take a look at it compared to Kopaka. You notice anything different? Well, it has to do with the arrangement of the entire torso. It's flipped upside down, and therefore the gearbox function is more on the bottom than on the top. This actually works a lot better for Pohatu, especially because he is wearing the Mask of Speed, and therefore his play feature subsequently would be to run fast. So you can have a kicking motion with one of the gears in his legs, the other one is kept stationary. So sometimes it makes it a little hard to pose because the gear will move, but for the most part he can stand his own ground. Now as far as his hands go, they are the same hands that we've seen with other figures such as Liwa and Tahu. They're just, again, in a different arrangement and have pretty much openness here. You can position these around to different sides and create some other poses with him. And as you saw in the beginning, I was able to pose him holding the ball that is next to him. This is actually a Lego piece, which is from the Rock Raiders originally, and it is part of the set. That way you can use a whole nother play feature that some of the other sets don't have, interacting with the environment. So we can just take this leg, bring it back, and play a little soccer with our friend Pohatu. I just gotta hold him steady just by the other leg. A swing and a miss. This is really more about me aiming than the function actually working, but it still has some posability on him. You also notice that his feet have an extension of a toe, and he also has some pins in his feet as well. So, a very interesting body type for him. And you may have also noticed by this point that his head does bob up and down, just by the way that it's arranged here. So, depending on how you hold him, it may be a flaw, but in general, I'm okay with it. All of these sets have a small type of game associated with them. In fact, it was one of the early ideas before Bionicle started, and even through some of the concepts and process of creating a story around these, was something that they fundamentally kept from their earlier project of the Voodoo Heads. You can read more about that in other sites. This is a function in which each of them are wearing masks, which I mentioned before have special abilities. I'll talk more about that in separate videos, because I got something a little planned for that as far as their abilities. But with the gear function, you can try to play a game in which you try to knock the mask off of your opponent. Now with these Toa, they are on the same team and they are all hero figures. But you can still play it off as if in the early day of, arriving on Motunui, they don't really know a lot about who they are, where they came from, how they got to where they are, and even about each other. So at first they may have a hostile approach to other Toa figures, and this would kind of make sense in the play, if you were to associate the story with it. So you have the gearboxes you can easily use to try to knock the masks off of other figures. And for some masks, they actually do hold pretty well. You might have differences depending on the tools that are used to knock these masks off, and even just a little bit of the pointing and just knocking it around. Let me see if I can do it a little bit better with Onua than with Tahu, because it seems his fire sword is not gonna cut it. So, even though he's a little shorter, I'm just gonna try out with Onua, trying to rip the mask. Maybe if we move his claws around to another angle, we can get a grip on Tahu. Or perhaps I could try around on this side to try to grab it from underneath. Oop, not quite there. Yes, it may be a little unorthodox and a little bit out of realism to try to get it this way. But there we are. And obviously you can knock these off on their own just by simply pushing in on the mask. The masks are only held by this mouthpiece on every one of them. That has the same mouthpiece, but a different brain stalk or a certain eye function that's behind each of them. If you were to shine a light behind them, you'll get different colors for each of them, usually in trans green, trans neon green, trans yellow, trans light blue, trans orange, and trans red. Each of these have their own unique masks in each set, and as I mentioned before, we'll talk more about the mask collections for another video.